Okay, Mass Culture Lecture Part 2. The last one just kind of got chopped off. Movie industry moves to Southern California. Flourishes from then on, pretty much. Okay, movie industry during the second decade of the last century proliferates more and more places to see movies, more and more interest in it. And the technology advances. Another big step came in 1915 with the first, as far as I know, feature-length film that ran in excess of 2 hours, which was amazing. And it was a huge production. It had indoor scenes, close-up headshots, outdoor panoramas, battle scenes. It was a Civil War Reconstruction epic called Birth of a Nation, actually The Birth of a Nation. So it was a cinematic breakthrough, and it was a huge thing, and President Wilson arranged a special viewing at the White House and pronounced it the greatest work of art he had ever seen. There's a problem, okay? Birth of a Nation was the movie version of a very popular best-selling novel published in 1905 by a man named Thomas Dixon under the title The Klansman. Title spells it with a C. We would spell it with a K, as in Ku Klux Klan. So the Klan were the heroes of the movie. Black people were portrayed as potential vicious savages that had to be kept under control. The Birth of a Nation, referenced in the title, was northern and southern white people joining hands after the Civil War to protect the nation against the Black Menace. It's if you're just curious, you can find it on YouTube, the full thing, near as they can piece it back together. If you decide to take a look at that, just out of curiosity, I recommend you see if you can get Pepto-Bismol in quart bottles. You might need it. Sorry. The movie Forrest Gump begins with a little clip from that. It's got the Klansman. He pulls his hood down and gallops away on his horse. The idea being Forrest Gump was a descendant of a Confederate cavalry general named Nathan Bedford Forrest, who organized the Reconstruction era Klan in 1866. Okay, setting the scene. So then we'll move on from there. 1920s mass culture. For one thing, any town of any size is going to have any number of movie theaters. I mean, a little town like Dublin, Texas might have had 4 movie theaters as late as the 1950s. They're all indoors. It's not till the 1950s that the drive-ins come along, and there are a handful of those left. Now, let's get back to the 1920s. There were in larger towns and cities, by the 1920s, you no longer have a movie theater that's just a bunch of folding chairs. They're building these garish, ostentatious movie palaces, like the Majestic in San Antonio. Some of them are left because they're architectural treasures, but most of the time the theater itself is more interesting than the movie that they're showing. So you have those. The movies continue to be, they prospered when nothing else was prospering on into the 1930s. Technological changes, mainly the introduction of sound. All right, the first sound movie of any kind was also the first Mickey Mouse cartoon. It's called Steamboat Willie. It's made in 1926, and here you have little Mickey Mouse whistling a tune as he pilots a steamboat down the river and having difficulties with a large cat. I posted a clip from Steamboat Willie. You're looking at the first movie with sound. Now, live action with sound, more of a problem. For one thing, they'd been able to put a soundtrack on a movie for a while. The problem was with live action was that the earliest microphones were big and bulky, and they would show, so they kind of had to get past that. There's another thing. The movie camera itself is an early contraption, and it's noisy. And if you're trying to record the sound of the actors speaking dialogue, you got this the sound of the movie camera running. So, whereas silent movies often had the camera positions were much more fluid and free. Once you go to the talkies, as they call them, um, they had to enclose the movie camera itself in a soundproof box, and so the camera position was much more static. I didn't know that till not that long ago. The first live action motion picture with sound was called The Jazz Singer. You know what? There's one more thing I need to throw down before I quite get to The Jazz Singer. The theaters belong to the production companies. Now, the way it's been pretty much ever since is that you have production companies, you have distribution companies, you have theater chains. They're separately owned. But in those days, each production company had its own chain of theaters. That's to set this up. They weren't set up to project a movie with sound. Okay? Because you'd have to replace your projectors. You had to make more than one of them per theater, and those are expensive. So another thing that holds it back is the expense of probably greater production expense, but where are you going to go to hear the sound? Anyway, now back to the Jazz Singer. One of the sort of second or third rate production companies that only had about 50 theaters at the time decided to take a chance on this. The production company was Warner Brothers. Let's just say it worked out. So the first motion picture with live actors with sound was called The Jazz Singer. Came out in 1927. It's kind of an intergenerational conflict thing where the protagonist, the lead actor, was a very popular actor of the day named Al Jolson, who in other roles did a lot of stuff in blackface. Would that ever be a no-no today? He didn't do it in this. He's from a Jewish family. He wants to be a jazz singer. His father, who is the cantor at the synagogue, strongly objects, but finally in the end comes around. Well, the sound was supposed to be music. They would have several songs, musical numbers in the film. They weren't really planning on having any dialogue at first, but they're shooting a scene. The clip is posted at the Canvas site where Al Jolson is sitting at a piano accompanying himself as he sings a song to an older actress who played his mother. He gets through and he says something like the first spoken words on film. Did you like that, Mama? And she said, yes. She stayed in character. She's surprised, stayed in character. Well, I'm glad. I'd rather please you than anybody else I know, something like that. And then there's more dialogue that follows, and it worked okay. Now, Al Jolson called this a near miss. He had a certain line he worked into everything he ever did. And the line was, you ain't heard nothing yet. Think about it. The movies have always been silent up to that one. Why couldn't those have been the first spoken word? You ain't heard nothing yet, but hey, you're about to from now on. And that was true. The movie was a huge success, although not that many theaters could play it back with the sound. And fairly quickly, the talkies came along. First is the movies where the people in the pictures move. And then you have the talkies where they talk or sing. And a writer in the mid 1930s, I think it might have been Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, he said, well, the next phase will probably be the feelies. Sorry. You'd sit there and hold on to these things with your hands at the armrests and feel. Fortunately, that one didn't ever materialize. Okay. The main thing here is the cultural impact. Mass culture, as a critic of the time pointed out, mass culture was urban culture. Urban culture was immigrant culture, the first and second generation descendants of new immigration immigrants. And to people of the sort of older standard American culture, and I'm born too late, I don't even know for sure what they're talking about, but they saw mass culture as a kind of foreign invasion. But the movies flourished, and they have a huge impact on younger people. You know what? There've always been young people. You're young now. I was young once. Guess what's going to happen to you? You better get ready. But the younger you are, the more impressionable you are. You're sitting in a darkened room. People are more impressionable, to use the word again, in a dark room. The actors and the sound are larger than life. And, but connect that with this. Everybody goes through a time in their life, whether they're conscious of it or not, where as they approach adulthood, they're figuring out what kind of person they're going to be, what their values going to be, what their cultures are going to be, that sort of thing. And if you're, say, the age you are now, 95 years ago in the 1920s, and there were people your age then, um, the older generation would, in the past, the older generation would provide the guidance and the cues for that. Sometimes in the 20s, they're not really stepping up to that. World War I had been such a shattering experience for so many people. It seemed to overthrow everything. All the old standards and norms are dead. As F. Scott Fitzgerald put it, they had awakened to find all wars fought, all gods dead, all faith in men shaken. That's where you are. So you're looking for role models, and you're going to find them somewhere. The people who came of age during the 1920s were the first generation of Americans whose role models were athletes and movie stars. Hmm. Well, I'm glad we got past that, aren't you? So the boys all want to swagger like Rudolph Valentino. The girls all want to be like Clara Bow or Mary Pickford, people like that. Forget which one it was, Pickford. I think they called her the It Girl. You either knew what it was or you didn't. She had a very long career. I think it was Mary Pickford's last movie role was in the late 1980s. Nearly 100 years old. Okay. Um, so there you go. Now, if you live in a town, you can go to the movies anytime you want to. If you live out in the country, it's a little bit more complicated. A trip to town could be an all-day affair. And the summertime, when it's hot in the afternoon, the movie theater is very likely the only air-conditioned place in the whole town. So people crowd into the movie theater. So this is going to have a big cultural influence. To some extent, deepening a cultural gap between rural and urban Americans. So, mass culture. The story continues. I don't want to put it in with the 1920s because I'm so short of time. 1930s, during the Great Depression, the average American went to the movies twice a week. I barely go to the movies twice a year. Twice a week? Average American. For everybody that went less than two, somebody else went more. And people involved in that, I am off in the 30s. I'm let you read about that in the supplements. Color doesn't come along to the end of the 1930s. Gone with the Wind, 4-hour epic. Um, it's shot in color, stem to stern. 1939, probably the most transformative year in the history of American cinema. You've also got Oz, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. The parts shot in Oz are in color. It cost 4 times as much to make a color flick as a black and white flick, and color doesn't really take over till the 1960s. All right, so we've seen motion pictures. The next one would be recorded music. In the late 1800s, Thomas Edison, or some of his engineers, figured out a device capable of capturing sound. That was so miraculous that when he first demonstrated his machine in front of an Academy of French scientists, 2 of them got up and just walked out. That's not possible. It involved what really amounted to like tinfoil on a rotating cylinder, and I posted a video about it, so you can check it out. And you have a needle, and the tinfoil cylinder is rotating and gradually moving along, and the microphone, early version, picks up the vibrations and transfers them to a jagged line on the cylinder. Tinfoil, sometimes they use wax, and you play it back, you could hear the sound. Now, it's just, you have to yell into it, but it shows it's possible.